You want to hear more about the suffering and tumultuous life of Scarlet Witch? We got you. Welcome back, Nerd Squad. We heard your cries for justice for Wanda, and we have come to answer them. Today we'll dive even more into the pain that she has suffered, which has often led to others' pain and suffering. I think it's so important with Wanda to gaze deep into the layers of her character and her story because she's just so complex and is so much more than any label anyone could ever put on her. Join me as we count down the top 10 worst things that happened to Scarlet Witch, Part 2! And if you missed Part 1, be sure to check it out after to learn even more about her rich backstory and complex history. Alright, now, let's get counting. Number 10, eaten by the Punisher. Yum. That's what the Punisher must be thinking. That and brains. Yes, this terrible moment comes to us from the alternate Marvel Zombies universe. In this reality, awful things happen to a lot of characters, and unfortunately, Scarlet Witch is no exception. She ends up being devoured and made into a meal by a zombified Frank Castle after briefly teaming up with Ash Williams of the Evil Dead, who also finds his way into this crazy Deadite-filled world. Number 9, murdered by Rogue. This one gets ranked lower as it all ended up working out in the long run anyway. Still though, this was a pretty shocking moment, as while Rogue hadn't forgiven Scarlet Witch by any means for what she had done to mutant kind, the two were still both on the same Avengers team at the time. Awkward. So they were teammates when this all went down. In the end, Scarlet Witch is killed by Rogue, then Rogue is killed by Grim Reaper, and Wonder Man basically gives his own life to help Wanda complete the spell that she was casting. But of course, as dark and awful as all of this felt at the time, none of it would be permanent because, well, comics. So don't worry too much because all these characters are A-okay. Well, Grim Reaper is A-okay and then isn't, so yeah. But this isn't the end of him here anyways. Number 8, her own village turned on her. The story of how Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver came to join Magneto's Brotherhood of Evil Mutants is kind of a sad one. A fire was ravaging her village and Wanda attempted to use her powers to put it out. But her powers only scared the other villagers, who instead blamed Wanda for causing the fire in the first place. It was as the angry mob turned on her that Magneto arrived to save the day. Forever in debt for saving her life, Wanda agreed to join his Brotherhood, and Pietro agreed to go with her in order to protect her. Both not knowing at this point the fake truth about Magneto and his relation to them. Not putting relation in quotations because I disrespect it. I'm just doing it because, you know, I know that they're not really related anymore, even though I wish they were. Number 7, losing her husband. As much as WandaVision paints a pretty picture of marital bliss for the couple that is Scarlet Witch and Vision, the reality in the comics is that it actually didn't really end that well. It probably actually won't end that well in WandaVision either, to be honest. And while in the comics many people may blame Wanda's actions for this, as during Avengers Disassembled she weaponized her husband, using him to, well, hurt his own friends, the reality is these two were struggling for quite some time before that. In fact, I would even suggest that their marital problems only helped lead Wanda to the mental break that caused Avengers Disassembled. At one point, Vision was disassembled and put back together again, actually disassembled, but this time without his emotional connection to Wonder Man. This created a huge challenge for the couple, and although Vision's memories would end up being restored to him of his and Wanda's time together, he would never really be the same, becoming much more emotionless from that point on. In a way, Wanda lost her husband when this happened, and she never really fully got him back. Did I also mention that Vision ended things with Wanda over the phone? Because that's also a thing that happened, which it's gotta be hard. Number 6, the trial of Scarlet Witch. Well, there never really was a full-on trial because then House of M happened, but before that, the X-Men and Avengers did at least have a discussion about what to do with Wanda after learning how unstable she was from Professor Charles Xavier, and after learning his power wouldn't be able to hold her back much longer from potentially doing harm and just completely going bonkers. In this discussion, we found out the mutants straight up wanted to kill her for the most part, especially Emma Frost and Wolverine. However, Kitty wasn't about that plan, at least. Well, pretty much all of the Avengers thought there must be a better way to deal with the situation, and planned to try to talk to Wanda and just figure it out with her. They were like, she's our teammate, she's our friend, she's going through stuff. In the end, however, when the Avengers and X-Men teamed up to go after Wanda, Quicksilver believed they were coming to kill her. And considering that, you know, Emma Frost and Wolverine kind of planned to probably do so anyways, probably wasn't wrong. And he also told his then believed father, Magneto, as much. It was this ultimatum that prompted Wanda to use reality to create House of M. How awful would it be to know that just because you couldn't control yourself and you were suffering from a mental breakdown, that other heroes wanted to kill you? That's pretty rough. Number 5, her reality shattering. One of the worst things to happen to Wanda likely was when the reality she built during House of M fell apart and just completely shattered. This wasn't just bad for her, by the way, but was also kind of bad for mutants, as in the end it led to decimation. I'd also kind of like to argue it's sort of bad for everyone, since Wanda was trying to give everyone, like, you know, their idea of like an ideal future. So yeah, it was pretty bad for everybody when that fell apart. Although, you know, ignorance isn't bliss, so hey. The really sad thing here too was that Wanda was actually trying to make the world good, especially for mutants, and yet in the end it would be mutants who would probably hate her the most as a result of this. It's kind of like a weird, ironic twist. Her perfect fantasy reality would come to an end, which would lead to a lot of ongoing pain for Scarlet Witch. Although some might think, you know, that she deserved to suffer after, as she is the one who created the problem to begin with, I think it's also important to note how many times her family and heroes kind of failed to be there for her when it obviously seemed like she was hurting. I actually think House of M is more about like this vilification of mental illness and like a warning that like we need to like be better. People don't just typically have a psychotic break out of the blue. It's important to remember that there is usually something that causes something like this. So we can't just blame Wanda. That's too easy in my mind. Number 4, Magneto has her committed. In the animated series X-Men Evolution, Wanda gets a sort of different backstory. Here she is shown up growing alongside her brother, raised by their father in the series Magneto. However, when her powers manifest at a young age and prove to be out of control, Magneto decides to have her committed, knowing it'll take too much of his own time if he tries to help her. Thanks, Dad. That's great. Despite the fact that young Wanda does not like this plan and actually begs her father not to leave her, he does so anyways. As a result, she spends years institutionalized, and when Charles Xavier comes to visit her in an attempt to help her, not even he seems to be able to really get through to Wanda. Number 3, manipulated by the High Evolutionary. Wanda's true origin story came out following the events of Axis, where we learned that Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver, while being related to one another, were actually not related to Magneto, nor were they truly mutants. This would lead to a lot of confusion in regards to Quicksilver's abilities, but it would also lead to some pretty dark truths being revealed about their past. Weird, dark truths that, I mean, don't honestly make a ton of sense. The High Evolutionary, it turns out, had experimented on the two of them when they were younger, and then decided to disguise them genetically as mutants before releasing them back out into the world. The High Evolutionary was then responsible for the powers that they had, and in a way was responsible for kind of creating who they were today. But this also led to them believing for most of their lives that they were mutants and Magneto's children, due to his weird disguise for them, which has to be even more confusing for the two of them as individuals than it even was for us reading it. Could you imagine if that was your life? If you were like, hey, I've been a mutant my whole life. Oh wait, no, it never was. And High Evolutionary is just like, I did that actually, that was me. Go away, High Evolutionary, get out of here. Number 2, her brother's death. In the Marvel Cinematic Universe, this was a heartbreaking moment for Wanda. Pietro was not just her brother, but he was like her other half. Losing him was like losing a part of herself. And as they were both orphaned, you also have to consider that Pietro was the last bit of family that she had left. So losing him was deeply painful as well for Wanda, as it meant she was now all alone, the last surviving member of her family. In WandaVision, Wanda seems to be building a family of her own, but even there we still see the mark of this sadness that Pietro's death left with her. This fear that she like carries around with her, that like she's alone, she doesn't have anyone. So sad. Number 1, her relationship with her brother. Normally I'd say this relationship is really a rock for Scarlet Witch, and that I enjoy how much these two siblings stick together no matter what and lean on each other for support. It's them against the world, and I love that. But there is an exception to where I love this feeling, and that exception is their relationship in the Ultimate Universe. Here, the siblings crossed a major line when it was revealed that they were closer than siblings should be, and loved each other in more than just a platonic or familial sense. This was definitely taking their relationship way too far, and was one of the worst things that has happened to either Scarlet Witch or Quicksilver in the comics, in my opinion. Ew. What do you think are some of the worst events Wanda has lived through? What do you think are the most heinous injustices she's suffered or caused? Let us know in the comments below. And speaking of comments, it's time to turn to some comments from one of our latest videos, Top 10 Worst Things the Green Goblin Has Ever Done. Sarah Sheeta comments, Red Goblin looks scary and I love it. You know what they say, you can't have a great hero without a great villain. I like that saying, and yes, Red Goblin's terrifying! Sunstar shares, rumors are Willem Dafoe will reprise his role as a cameo in Tom's Spider-Man 3 sporting a new look. Hope it's true and he looks great. I also hope that is true and that he looks great. I would love if Willem Dafoe came back. That would make me so happy. Also, Willem Dafoe is just such a good actor. Can he just be like in everything? Probably not, but that would be cool. And that's all the time we have for comments today. Be sure to comment below for a chance to have your thoughts and feels shouted out in a future video. This has been Top 10 Nerd, and I'm your host, Amanda McKnight, reminding you, as always, to stay nerdy, YouTube.